How's everyone doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today I bring you a great video that originates from the BBC over in UK, and it deals with abortion in Africa. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the side effects? How is it going to affect economies, etc., etc.? But before we watch the video and before I give you my opinion about it, what I want to do is tell you who is involved. Now you have two women. One's the opponent, one's the proponent. Now, the proponent is the BBC reporter, a woman by the name of Babita Sharma, who's of Indian descent. And I presume she's been living in the UK for quite a long time, probably all her life. Now, the opponent of abortion is a woman by the name of Obianuju Ekeocha, or Uju for short. She's a Nigerian. She's been in UK for a while, but she was born and raised in Nigeria. So you're going to see their perspectives. You're going to see their point of view. And I think this video, this debate really symbolizes the same thing that happens over here in the U.S. between white liberals and black conservatives about abortion, right? You got one side trying to tell the other that they don't know what's going on, even though the other side that they're trying to preach to has a more vested interest because they are the person that they're trying to talk to, right? But you'll understand more what I mean after we get done with the video. So without further ado, go ahead and roll it.
Just to point out that about 80% of the African countries actually don't have legal abortion. And they don't have legal abortion not because they can't legalize abortion. We all have parliaments, we have governments that can go through the process of legalizing abortion. But actually, an overwhelming majority of the African people continue to reject abortion, even as surveys. I think Pew Research had done a survey a couple of years ago and found out, in some countries as high as 90-something% of the people still continue to reject the idea of legalized abortion. So I don't understand, are we talking about abortion? Are we talking about contraception? They're two different things. If we're talking about abortion, well, I don't think that any Western country has a right to pay for abortions. In an African country, especially where majority of people don't want abortion, then that then becomes a form of ideological colonization, as we're beginning to see it more and more.
But say if we talk about contraception, the fact remains that hundreds of millions of women don't have access and should.
No. Well, you're saying should, but who are you to decide, if you don't mind me saying?
Well,
because the thing is,
there
isn't a popular demand, ma'am. There isn't a popular demand. If you go to Africa, what people are asking for every day, because I was born in Africa, I was raised in Africa, I continue to go to Africa many times a year. You just speak to any ordinary woman. I think contraception might be like the 10th thing she says, if that.
But it's a basic human right to have access to it. That's when I say that they should have access. It should become available for them if they want it.
When
it should be
there is no
available.
food and there is no water, then if there is only a limited amount of aid.
But it is part of that cycle of poverty and dealing with poverty and overcoming poverty, is it not?
Well, that's kind of a Western solution, isn't it? But if the Africans are brought to the table, and the people are asked, the ordinary people, I'm not speaking about some doctor that works for some Western organization that is planted in Africa. If you speak to the ordinary woman on the streets of Africa, what is she asking for? She's asking for food. She's asking for water. She's asking for basic health care. And contraception continues to be like about the last thing that they would ever think of.
But does
now,
that
talking
not,
about contraception,
but does that not play into the wider conversation about poverty and food? If they have access to contraception, if they can deal with birth control, if they can have a family planning program in place, then it deals with the issues of poverty as well.
That is the Western solution. Why don't you listen to the people first? Now, talking about something like contraception, in all this talk about contraception, the one thing that I have never heard of in all my time trying to track all these things is something like the side effects of contraception. No one ever tells the African women when they come to promote contraception across the different African countries. No one talks about it. Now, recently, I spoke to some women in Africa who had contraception inserted into them. I think it was something like the IUD and the implanon. And these women were crying. I found myself consoling women who had actually been experiencing these side effects that they had never heard of before. No one ever told them. But someone from a Western organization, one of these Western organizations in Africa, came and put IUDs into them and told them, this is what you need to come out of poverty. That is not what African women need. That is not the single indicator to come out of poverty. What Africans need is education. education.
They
it's
do
opportunities,
indeed. It's about
These are the kind of
education as
things.
well, so that they understand their basic human rights. It's not just about
Well,
the
basic
West
human
coming
rights,
and
according
imposing
to you,
something.
these are colonial thoughts, so you better be careful expressing them. According to whom? So there are Africans who don't have access to education. What children are looking for is a way to get into school. Someone like myself, I was born in Africa, I was raised in Africa. My lifeline out of poverty was education. It was not contraception. And there are so many other women who have walked the same path as I have without ever having to take recourse to some contraception provided by the British government or the United States government.
So you're you're then also generalizing, speaking on behalf of, every woman on the continent, saying that the majority of them...
So are you. You're talking about a general solution when Africa is actually not a monolithic
all I'm
society.
saying is that they should have the right to have access to.
Well, they do. We have contraception in Africa. As a matter of fact, a lot of the aid money is being actually redirected to provision of things like contraception.
Well, when the United Nations says that more than 200 million women don't have access to it, then that's contradicting what you're saying.
How many of those people? I am not contradicting them. I'm saying these are the calculations by the United Nations. But how many of those 200 million women are actually asking for it? There is a difference between what the United Nations now calls the unmet need and the unmet demand.
Correct.
What the African women are actually dying
perhaps,
of.
When we go back to education, perhaps they're unaware.
Well, it's for someone like yourself, someone so kind and generous from the West to come tell them that what they need is contraception to come out of poverty. Now you give them contraception, and the next day they still don't have work. The following year they still don't have work.
Obianuju, I would really love to discuss this further with you. We're just 10 seconds to go off air, so thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're able to see that. You saw what's going on there. Now, I thought that was a fantastic teardown by Ms. Uju. It was great. And the woman, Ms. Sharma, didn't have too much to say. She was just pretty much trying to stay on her talking points, talking about how access to abortion, access to so-called birth control will help women come out of poverty. But it doesn't really make any sense. Can you insert an IUD into a woman and then just magically make her become a millionaire overnight? Would it help her be able to get food? Would it help her to be able to get water? Would it help her to be able to get an education? I think not. And those things right there are more important than access to so-called birth control. Now, what this woman, Babita Sharma, was talking about was like eugenics. It was like straight from Margaret Sanger. Get rid of the useless eaters, this, that, and the third. It's really not the way that African women think about doing things. It's really not the way that most women in the world think about doing things. The average woman is not wanting to kill her baby. The average woman is not into that kind of stuff. The average woman who has any kind of humanity would just want to protect her child, raise her child, nurture her child, not destroy their child because it's too many, right? Now, some would say, Anthony, what are you talking about? You can't have 8, 9, 10 kids, but yet still be asking for aid. Now, I understand where you're coming from, but let's talk about it a little bit deeper. Do you know what the infant mortality rate is in Africa? You're talking about the highest in the world. Many countries in Africa have the highest infant mortality rate in the world. Think about it like this. The country of Angola has an infant mortality rate of about 180 per 1,000 live births. Compare that to the U.S. that has an infant mortality rate of about 6.8 per 1,000 live births. Okay, so there's a big difference there. And beyond that, look at the actual mortality rate. Look at the life expectancy rate of everybody living. You're talking about 40.8 in Angola. And many countries in Africa have that same kind of mortality rate. Compare that to a place like Japan, which is like 80, 90 or something like that. Okay, so it's much different. And then also look at Africa and its actual population density. It's actually sparsely populated, contrary to popular belief or opinion. Even in West Africa, where you got the most people and the most concentration, like in Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, Benin, etc., it's much less populated than Europe is, right? And Europe has a very low birth rate. And also look at the Indian subcontinent. Look at China. China has the one-child policy in much of its actual territory, but yet they still have 1.3 billion people. There's only about 800 million people in all of sub-Saharan Africa. And sub-Saharan Africa is extremely big, right? I'll put a map on the screen before you to show you how big it actually is. It's sparsely populated, even beyond just the regions where you cannot have people like Sahara Desert. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa. It's very big and it's sparsely populated, contrary to popular belief, because you have infant mortality, a low life expectancy. Most of the population in some countries is below 20 years old. So keep that in mind when you're saying, oh, well, it's too many kids, it's that and the third. You got to look at the whole picture, the greater picture. And if it's too many kids, the solution is not to kill them. The solution is to say, okay, if we're giving you the aid and it's being misused, or we feel like you're being irresponsible with it, the solution is to just remove the aid. Don't give the aid if you think it's not being used properly. It's very simple. If you want to be a humanitarian, if you want to help directly, bypass all of the red tape, bypass all of the government, bypass the Red Cross and stuff like that with their administrative fees, this, that, and the third. Go straight to Africa on a mission and be there with food in your hand and give it straight to the people. Do that. Give food, give water, go there and become a teacher or something like that if you really want to help, or support those that are actually there doing that. Do not support these corrupt NGOs that want to engage in human trafficking and stuff like that. My whole point is that you're not going to insert an IUD to a woman and then overnight she's going to become a millionaire, nor will it even take her out of poverty. To be more realistic, beyond just me making a greater point by exaggerating, you're not going to help the situation because she needs actual things that are going to help her to get forward to the next day: food, clothing, shelter, education, etc. Right? And beyond that, let's look at the side effects, like what Uju was talking about. The side effects of these IUDs. You're talking about ovarian cysts, cancer, complications that lead to death, stuff like that, in a place where there's no real medical infrastructure. Why have this thing that's going to help you when it creates more problems than it actually solves? The truth is, most developing countries or undeveloped countries, whatever you want to call them, have a very high birth rate. That's just what it is. Once you go to places like the United States, Europe, whatever, they're gonna have a very low birth rate because they're more developed. There's no need to really continue to build the population. You're pretty much good. But in a place where it's very poor, when you have a high infant mortality rate, you're gonna have a much higher birth rate. That's just natural. So when you come in there with your IUDs, with your abortion mills or whatever, you're trying to play God. At the end of the day, we all know how it goes, and human beings try to play God. You cannot try to interfere with the natural order of things. You could try to do it, but why would you do it? Just back off. If you think that Africa needs aid, like I said, give it to them directly. If you think that it's being misused, then don't give it. But what you should not do under any circumstances, just go above the wants and demands of the actual African people. If you do a survey and you go to Africa and they say, okay, we want X, Y, and Z, and you give them A, then what are you doing? You're just trying to insert your own point of view, your own logic, your own civilization onto the people. You can say it's better and that's fine. But at the end of the day, if they don't want it, then that's their prerogative. Respect people's sovereignty, respect people's ability to be able to choose what they want. Many countries in Africa just came from colonialization recently. You're talking about 50 years ago or less, maybe even 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So they don't want to go back to that in a pseudo form. That's how it starts. When people come in from different places, UK, US, etc., and they say, okay, do this thing, take these abortion pills, take this IUD, and just forget all of what you know, your whole family, your grandma, your mom, your auntie, your dad, uncles, cousins, etc. Tell them that they were all wrong and accept my way of doing things. That's how colonialism is. It invades the mind when it's not always physical, when it's not always on the books and legislated. But that's pretty much all I got for it. What do you think? Do you think it's a good thing to have abortion or access to abortion in Africa? Would it help the poverty? Now, when you answer that question, be realistic. If you give a woman access to abortion, would that just help the country flourish? Would you change a place like Central African Republic, when you got wars going on right now between Christians and Muslims, would you change that into Western Europe by giving them access to abortion? It doesn't make any sense. You can't even change Eastern Europe into Western Europe because of abortion. So why are you going to change Africa into Western Europe because of abortion? It does not make sense. The people of a nation make the nation. You're not going to be able to input so-called ideas or, so-called infrastructure or whatever you want to label it as when you refer to abortion into a place and transform it into a different place. Allow people to have their own country, allow them to be able to flourish on their own. If they ask for certain things, you can give it to them or not give it to them, but don't try to put your own twist on what they need. But do you think I'm wrong here? Do you think that Western powers, US, UK, other Western European nations, should they just go over the top of the average African's head and just do whatever they want to do because it's in their best interest because of aid. You're giving too much aid and you'll be able to give less aid with less people. Now, my thing is, okay, if you're dealing with abortion, what about infant mortality? Like in reality, the infant mortality is greater than abortion is in the US. If you look at it, because look at how many kids die. You talking about more than are actually killed from abortion in the US as a percentage. I mean, I'm not Albert Einstein, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm pretty sure if you did the math, you would find that same thing to be true. But that's all I got for it. Whatever your comments are, let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.